Some ground rules for tonight. We will have some moderated questions, followed by some interaction with you, our esteemed guests, followed again by some moderated questions from the panelists, and again, some questions from you. I believe that there is a political party launch downstairs. Because of that, we were moved to this beautiful lounge, the Aura Lounge. This was a message from the goddesses imploring us to rise above partisan politics. and to take a panoramic view of our beautiful country. So, when you ask your questions, please be succinct and to the point with little preamble. Please mute your phones and give us your undivided attention for the next 2 hours. With that, I'm proud to introduce tonight's distinguished panelist and moderator. Starting from left, Mr. Elson Lowe, Queen's College alumnus. And to his right, Ms. Grace Anisia Abbey, our great moderator, Mr. Enrico Wolford, Ms. Patricia Backus, Mr. Lawrence Lachman Singh, and Professor Clive Thomas. Their bios are in the brochure, so in the interest of time, you may read that. So I'd like to welcome you again on behalf of this loosely coupled group of women who have all been to Queen's College in celebration of the 175th anniversary of Queen's College, and in the tradition of Queen's College being not only a center of learning, but a center of civic engagement. So thank you very much for being here, and without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Karen. Welcome to this panel discussion, this conversation towards a just and caring society, imagining Guyana in 2045. You heard the introductions, and as I said last evening, there are some of my own ground rules that I put in. Those of you who were here last night would have heard me say, if you're sitting next to someone you don't want to be seen on television, sitting next to you, free to move now. Because we are streaming this live on UG Space Facebook page, and I think the Lichter Live people are here, but they're not live. So you've got to be conscious that there are going to be other people listening and watching with us today. The other thing about, I think it's a Caribbean thing, probably it's our part of the world. When we ask questions, we tend to make a statement, and I think Karen has alluded to that, and then we come to the question or an observation. We would like just questions, and I'm going to stick to that. The other aspect of it is, even when you're asking a question, for some reason we believe that length in the Caribbean is depth. So the longer we go on, the deeper we think our thoughts, and more profound the thoughts are. So let's keep it, as Karen said, succinct. So to the panelists, we are going to deal with a just and caring society, and I want to ask each one of them to give us your vision for a just and caring society in 2045 and describe just one policy that is integral to your vision. And since this side looks a little younger than this side, I'm going to begin at this end with Elson. What is your vision? The microphone is between the chair.
Good evening, everyone. I think the best way to understand my vision is through understanding something that I'm very passionate about, which is, as some of you will already know, which is free education at the university. The reason that I'm passionate about that is that I see that in many ways as being a symbol for the direction that I think the country can and should head. And I see it also as being something which will transform the way that Guyanese relate to the problems and challenges that we face. Now, I am a great student of the classics, so I want to tell you a quick story to see if that can kind of highlight the power and importance of symbolism and how that can have a big impact on the future. So I'll take you back to a very, very classic story, which is from the Common Era, which is the period just before the birth of Jesus Christ and just after the birth of Jesus Christ. So that's the period during which you have a lot of famous figures like Caesar, like Cleopatra, like Mark Antony, like Octavius. You have a lot of famous figures during that period. And a lot of small things that happen in that period have very large impacts. So the first one that I want to look at is, during the grand tales of Caesar's expeditions, there's one about his journey across the Rhine River. And it's one in which he is actually able to ensure the safety of the Roman Republic without having to fight anyone. And what he does is when he arrives at the Rhine River, which is a huge river, it's sizable, it's difficult to cross, instead of taking boats across, he constructs a large bridge in a short space of time, an architectural feat that had not been done before in the ancient world. This so surprises the Germans on the other side that they decide not to fight. So that's one simple example of a symbol that caused a big change. Now, of course, the fact that Caesar did not fight them and did not stay over there is why we are speaking English and not some sort of Latin language, because, of course, the lands that Caesar did conquer all ended up speaking Latin-based languages. So a small thing had a huge impact on how we relate to everything nowadays. The second thing is that over the course of another campaign, this is in Egypt, he is looking to consolidate rule in Egypt, and he accidentally burns down the Library of Alexandria. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but that was the repository of ancient knowledge. And so inadvertently, he sets the stage for the Dark Ages. And so I say all this to say that we kind of face a situation here where we have a lot of capacity going forward, but we can do a lot of different things with this. And I would much prefer that we spend our time building bridges than we spend our time burning libraries and then go back in the Dark Ages.
I should thank you there because I was supposed to give you only 90 seconds.
Well, I
would
hope that you all get where I'm going with this.
Thank you, Elsa. And I have my stopwatch going here, so we'll give you 90 seconds with some breaks.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm a curator. I live in New York, and I'm in Guyana once, and if I'm lucky, twice. I'm really lucky 3 times a year. So this is how my work usually goes. I come, I meet with the incredible, brilliant artistic community here. I see the wonderful work that they're doing. And then I go back to the States, and I put them in projects and exhibitions everywhere but Guyana. And that's a good thing, of course, because we want our Guyanese artists to have that global exposure and that global success, but it's equally heartbreaking because they don't have the spaces and the support systems and the infrastructure here to show all of that beauty and brilliance. So my dream for 2045 is that Guyana finally has a beautiful museum space that honors the artistic and cultural legacy of this country, a museum space that honors the architectural history of this country. Yesterday we were talking a little bit about all of the awful construction growing up, so it would be lovely to have a beautiful space that does two things. Really provides the opportunities for artists to show their work, but also a lovely, beautiful building for Guyanese to see themselves and celebrate themselves through the arts. So that's my very simple little unit.
Thank you so much, Grace, for being from libraries to bridges to museums. Patricia.
My vision for a just and caring Guyana by 2045 is a Guyana where the interests of the citizens are paramount to any other interests. And to secure this, I believe the public policy that we need to be adopting very strongly is one of accountability. I think it is only where authority are accountable to performance standards that we'll see improvements in the functionality of the agencies that are intended to protect the citizens. And this is not just public sector, it is also private sector. So I'm referencing the Department of Labor to ensure that the private sector uphold the labor laws, the Guyana Revenue Authority to ensure that tax laws are properly enforced. We're talking about public security, public health care, where persons are made to answer for their performance and where there's recourse for citizens who are aggrieved in the process, where leaders are servants of the citizens and are treated as such, where respect is earned. And I think, like I said, critical to this is the concept of accountability.
Thanks, Patricia. Lawrence?
Thanks, Enrico. First of all, thanks to the organizers for having a non-QC person on the panel. There's two of us here. Given the rivalry between my school and QC, St. Stanislaus and QC, this might be... There may be hope for political rapprochement after all. Before jumping into the question of policy and vision, I think it's just to sort of quickly give a snapshot of what is the injustice and lack of care that we need to fix. Just to give a few examples for those who are not as versed in the data, we have the lowest level of trust in the police in the region. We have the third highest level of suicide in the world, according to the WHO. We have the highest level of outward migration, according to the OECD. A recent panel with UG folks were saying that apparently only 7% of UG graduates still reside in the country. Corruption, police corruption is high. We could go on. I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that there are ways of measuring the injustice and lack of care. And I think it comes down, Startup News put it the other day this way, that we have become a very materialistic country and people have become preoccupied with money, earning and possessing things. And that's not a bad thing to like money. But the love of money, of course, as we know from other places and religious places, is kind of the root of all evil. So if we have too much love of money, then we tend to have this social dysfunction. What I think we need to do in terms of policy is something to build on what Mr. Lowe just said, is to move from love of money to love of one another and love of country. And something I think we've lost in our education system, and I say education broadly, not to put the burden on the schools, but on our communities, on our societies, on our NGOs and so on, is that we need to re-socialize our young people to love the country and love one another. Revamping it in a way that produces citizens, functional citizens, and not just ingredients for economic growth. Young people who go into the hinterland, who are environmentally conscious, who do community service, who are exposed to art and culture to develop a well-rounded personality where they appreciate this place and wish to live here in a way that is just and caring. National service, if I could just end on that, is something that got us very close to a point of seeing the rest of this country beyond the coast and living with people of other races and other genders, and having, I think for me certainly, as one who went through national service, an incredible formation as a citizen of Guyana. So that's my sort of sense of the policy that we need. Granted that it's a complex question and we need many policies, but this would be my favorite.
Thanks, Lawrence. And so far, the men have outnumbered the women in terms of time. The men have taken twice as long to say what they're supposed to do. Elson started by going on for 3 minutes and 32 seconds. Lawrence for 3 minutes and 2 seconds. The nice Grace was 1 minute and 13 seconds. And my good friend Patricia here was 1 minute and 32 seconds. I say all of that to ensure that Dr. Clyde Thomas does not top it all. Dr. Clyde.
Okay, I was hoping that you wouldn't deduct the time from me. My vision is very simple and basic. It's laser focused on one thing, which I would not have had 3 years ago. And that is, I think, with the coming forward, we have an opportunity to eradicate income poverty from this country. Income poverty is being driven by 2 main drivers. That is low and fluctuating incomes and the lack of assets, whether financial, hard assets, or skills in terms of human capital among the poor. And we have an opportunity coming with oil to be able to overcome that. And I will elaborate as we go on through the evening.
Wonderful. Now we move it. Thank you, Dr. Clyde Thomas. Let him heard the opening statements. And I think we need to examine quite a number of things. And Lawrence, because you went on for the longest, probably you can, the second longest, you can probably go to this one, looking at economic and social development. What model of governance do you think Guyana needs at this juncture that is best for it, where it has worked and what are the challenges in the Guyana context?
Thanks, Enrico. I think first of all, consistent with the number of analysis we've done over the years, we need to devolve power from the center to the local levels. The sense we have is that there is too much of a glitter to the prize of central government, which raises the stakes politically. But we know we need to empower communities, we need to empower local governments, we need to build their capacities, of course. We need to think of a number of things that puts power closer to communities and systems where they can be held more accountable for local development. That suggests that we need to actually reduce the size of government. Let me quote something here. As a percentage of GDP, the overall level of public sector expenditures over the period 2006-2013 was 65%. So we're spending a lot of money on the state, and according to Clive Thomas, who I want to quote, the performance record suggests that the Guyana government has been too large, too cumbersome, too inefficient, and technologically underdeveloped to have been entrusted with spending as much as 2/3 of Guyana's GDP over the past decade. The great article that you did in 2014, Professor Thomas, and you hold on to that. So I would just hold on to that point. I think we need to do a number of things, but one is to make government smaller and not decentralized. That takes things to the center and puts it in the middle. I'm talking about giving power to local communities, NGOs, NDCs, and so on. Much more than we do right now.
Clive, you want to comment on this one? And I'll ask Patricia to also.
Yes, I try to link it into what I made as my first comment. I believe that underlying all of the difficulties of politics is the way in which we treat citizens who are poor. I really feel they are not treated as citizens equal to everybody else. Our attitudes towards them reflected, our behavior towards them is that we want them as supporters. We do not care really and deeply about them. And therefore, that is why I believe we have to go to the root of the problem and to remove the poor from among us.
Patricia?
I concur with what has been said, but I want to just touch on one point that Lawrence made. If we are going to move power closer to the community level, capacity building is imperative, because as it now stands, we are unable to do that. Even if we could, it's not possible. Just they cannot execute programs, they cannot manage budgets. They're poor. And the persons who are there occupying offices are not able to provide the services that would be required. So capacity building is key for that shift.
Grace, let me turn to you. You're a lover of the arts. And do you think the arts and culture will play a part, the creative arts will play a part in social and economic development and getting people to understand how to take command of their own destiny?
They already are. So artists are making art, yes, for art's sake, but the artists, even though they're a small community here in Guyana and to a larger extent the diasporic community, they're also making art that are responding to very prescient 21st century issues. They're making art and engaging migration issues. They're making art and engaging gender violence issues. I was talking to an artist yesterday that was making work that's going to tackle what happens, gender violence, domestic violence in this country. And so it's not that they need to start doing that. They've been doing that. The issue is there's no audience for it. There's no support for it. There's no community interested in hearing what this artistic community has to say. That, I think, is where the real work is. But I wanted to say to Clive's point about the poor in this country. You know, my family, when I lived here, we grew up very poor. And when I come back to visit too, it is so heartbreaking to see Guyana still very much a tale of two countries. You know, the Pegasus world and the rest of Guyana. And it's really, really, even in 2019, to see that so little has changed when we think about how we neglect and erase people that are poor in this country.
So how do you see us in 2045 if we were to use the arts to, as you said earlier, push the agenda forward?
I really don't know. I don't have a fleshed out answer to that question because, to be frank, most of the artistic community in this country is also poor, is also financially struggling, and there is no sort of income opportunities here for them to have a full-time artistic practice and survive and pay their bills on that. So they're working full-time jobs or 2-3 jobs and then trying to get home to have an artistic practice and make their money.
Elson, the society has also used NGOs so much that I have a colleague in the media who says we're now a society of NGOlogists. We have a lot of people who focus just on NGOs. But are the NGOs making a difference? Based on some of the figures that we are hearing from this side and the concerns that Lawrence and Dr. Clive have mentioned, do you think NGOs can play a greater role in economic and social development?
Absolutely. I just want to make a very quick comment on the previous answer, which is that I think one of the things that's important to note is that the only way that you're going to get power devolution is if you have devolution of the power of the purse. That is to say, the ability to raise revenues. And I mean, the classic example is City Council, which is owed billions of dollars in tax, and as a result is not able to finance itself in a sustainable way. If it were able to do so, then you'd have a very different situation. But that's regarding that. As regards NGOs and their influence, I think a debate I had recently, I think, will prove quite enlightening on this, which is that I formed an NGO that worked with some of the students from the less or underserved communities to teach them math and algebra. And we did this at Queen's College's campus. We did this for 5 years. We taught hundreds of students. But essentially one of the things I realized as oil discoveries came in and I recognized the revenues were coming in, is that the role of the NGO, I think, needs to change. The NGOs are operating in a very difficult environment in Guyana because there's very little funding and the problems are very complex problems. But now that there is going to be revenues, there is going to be revenue, I think that it's important for NGOs to have a strong policy focus as to how exactly revenues can be used to actually accomplish these objectives. And given that they've been in the field and that they've done all of this, that they understand the problems well, I think that advocacy is now more important than it has ever been. And so it is my hope that NGOs will retool towards advocating well-researched, well-understood policy objectives that the government can, that whichever government can adapt and implement. And I think that if they do that, they will have a very significant role in Guyana development.
Let's go back to the issue of cash transfers. Dr. Clyde, you have thrown out what I think you're calling the Boston proposal.
Yes.
And why do you think is the best use, that is the best use of some of the oil revenues?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say the best, but the necessary use. Necessary in the sense that the other things that the government plans to do, or any government plans to do, are also necessary because they have a responsibility for spending revenues. But I believe that since the central problem of development in this country is pervasive income poverty, and we can get revenues to solve that problem, that we should use them in a focused, laser-like way to solve that problem. This is not hypothetics. We're likely to get that we will go even from the Stable block as it stands, over 117 billion US dollars. And that's not my estimate. That's the estimate out there in the marketplace for everybody to read. Go on the website and look it up. But this is only the Stable block. We haven't talked about the other blocks. We haven't talked about the inland discoveries to come. Guyana is a place where I believe that we will be producing 1.5 to 2.5 million barrels of oil per day in the late 1920s. And I think that we need to take that vision and do something concrete in it. And I suggest the Buxton proposal. Now, many people believe that I'm going to hand people cash. But the Buxton proposal is not asking people to go home with baskets of cash and hand them in the interior. You're going to make the transfer electronically. You're going to make it for the banks, in shops, wherever there is some internet service going on, as people have phones. And once you do that, you bring people into the digitalization of the entire economy. It's income. Therefore, they have to pay taxes. And the foundation of all good government is the payment of taxes and government fulfilling the contract of spending the taxes fairly and generously among the people without corruption. So it brings every citizen that receives the Buxton funds into the taxation system. It is also reasonable because it's given to every household, so nobody can say a party is trying to help one party or supporters or not. It's going to every household. So it's a neutral claim and resources. I set a limit on it. I said we devote a tithe of the revenues I projected to get to that purpose. That is 10% of the government take will go to that. And the government take will only be going to that when we reach a level of producing 1 million barrels a day. And I want to remind you now that Exxon is projecting, based on what it has already discovered in the Stable block, to be producing 0.8 or 800,000 barrels of oil for $0.8 million barrels or 800,000 barrels by 2025. So what I'm talking about is within our ambition, and that is why I'm so focused, laser focused on it. There's something within our capabilities. If only citizens will sit back and reflect and see that this is within our grasp, It's not a fairy tale dream. It's a real reality. And if we leave it to the state, they would have wasted it, mismanaged it, thief it, you will see what will happen. We have a chance to sequester an important stake for the poor people, and we should be doing that. That is where I'm coming from. And it's not an idle proposal. It's a proposal that I show can be concrete. I've written a document in it, and if people can leave their email addresses with their organizers, I will send it to them. So when you see the scope and breadth of it, I would also like to add that this is something that not originated from any fancy theorizing. It is based on empirical experience. I've given people in this room copies of the literature on the topic, and it is acknowledged by every single development agency, whether it's the World Bank, the IMF, the different, the FAO, whatever it is, that cash transfers are the single most effective means of policy intervention in dealing with poverty.
I like the idea that you took the time to make it very clear, and I think at this point, we've been going for about half an hour. We can probably open the floor to some questions, and as we said earlier on, if you keep your questions concise, then we can move on for about 15 to 20 minutes.
Are there any questions?
Is it possible that everything that you speak about could be encompassed in what one of the panelists said about devolving power, but also not being bound by this drive to copy the developed countries in ways that are very bad for us, where we can have systems here that suit our country, our people, that will do what you're saying you want to do. Devolution of power, but with devolution of power we need getting rid of personality politics.
What's your question?
My question simply is, how are you going to do all the things that you say you're going to do if you don't deal with the cancers that are in the big developed countries?
Thank you.
Lawrence, do you want to start on that, or are you going to pass the flag?
I believe that
It sounds like the price is right.
yes, I believe that we can't solve all the problems of humanity. So I've been very careful to carve out the ones that I think that are solvable. I think we can solve income poverty. I do not believe that we can create heaven on earth. I do not honestly believe that. We could try, and I will keep supporting those like you who want to try to do that. But I think that we have a target that is important, and is part and parcel of that effort, that broader effort you're speaking about, of trying to do something for ourselves that are creative and supportive of our culture development. I embrace everything that the lady from Steve spoke about the arts, but I believe that we should also try to do things that are practical and achievable, and set them as generational targets. I know 2045 is not quite a generation, but still, that's the vision we give us.
Thanks. Anybody else want to add to that before we hear from this gentleman at the front here, holding the Brahma's Guyanese with suit?
There we go.
All right.
One.
We have one from over there too.
Yes.
Aaron.
And we have one, Lennox, Dr. Yaw.
You had
Okay, so we're the women. Okay, well, I'll start with the gentleman here.
Professor, my question is, would you give the transport to my family? Growing up, if my family was given that amount that you mentioned, we would have a big party, spend most of it, and in a month time, we would be broke and hungry like we were before. Would you give it to us?
Sorry for this. And I tried to find out who you were because I didn't recognize the names. And I will tell you what to do. But there are people there who are who behave like that. I don't doubt it. We remember that we give out cash transfers as we speak, but we give them to the business community. Every tax break, every tax write-off, every tax break we give to any firm in this country. It's the same thing as taking the tax from them and handing them back money. We do that all the time, and none of you question. You don't say what they do with the money. They're shipping it to the United States, to Europe. You sit down there, you get a chance to get some money, and you begin to question whether your people will behave responsibly. I don't doubt your household, my God doesn't know more about your The question I want to make is that the generality of people would not do that. That is not the culture of my town. I know many people who are anxious for opportunities to be able to get a self-sustaining livelihood in Guyana. Now, an amount like 5,000 US per annum would make or break them.
Thank you.
These are students, you know.
My question is, what role must a legal system play in this journey towards this just society that we talk about?
You started out.
Pass the microphone to the lawyer in the panel. I guess that's fair. I believe that a functional legal system is integral to development in this country across every sector. We started a modernization of the judiciary program so many years ago, and we still have our judges and our magistrates handwriting their own notes. That in itself extends the life of any court appearance by 100% in terms of time. And if we cannot tackle simple, like what I would consider to be, and this has been 15 years in the making, if we cannot implement simple steps like that, that would make a tangible difference, I don't know where we are. So we're dealing with issues of delays, we're dealing with backlogs, we're dealing with access is another issue because you have a legal aid clinic that is underfunded and understaffed. So you're essentially locking the poor out of the legal system. You're dealing with no accountability to deliver judgments within a specific time frame. The problems have all been documented. And you're right, it is essential that we correct that, whether the private sector issues, issues between citizens, civil matters, criminal matters. You need to be able to deal with your legal problems efficiently and effectively, and right now we are not. But to say to you what is required to take us there, I cannot, because I can't currently understand why we are not yet there. And perhaps that's one of the reasons that I am not a practicing attorney. Timmy, I'm sure you have a question or a comment.
Actually, I think...
We have Peter.
No, you
Yeah.
to respond. He's the head of the bar.
I don't need the mic.
Well, we need the mic
You need the mic for recording purposes. Clyde, this is more at you. Models exist for this dilemma we face. What to do with all this money? Why don't we have a team of people simply look at the models of Norway, what worked, what didn't work, the models of the Middle East, where They have less oil than we do. They buy Lamborghinis for the rich, import Filipinos to take the role of the poor. I mean, I don't see why we have this big dilemma. What's the problem with studying what's work, what's not work? And then take it from there. They have one.
Clive, I'm here to make sure you don't get a battery. I was about to see that my friend right in front of you is better equipped answer than the minister. I have a little say as you do on these matters. I have never been invited by the government to discuss anything to do with oil and the future of Guyana and oil since I've been working with the government. And that's the truth. If I had conversation with your card privately, there's been no official engagement in the topic. There's no brainstorming.
But that doesn't answer my question.
No,
There are
it
one.
does because it tries to show you that the level of the ignite that prevails.
Thanks, Dr. Thomas.
I think Elson, you wanted to come in.
Yes, I wanted to say if I could make a comment. One of the things I think it's important to recognize is the pace at which, oil discoveries and the pace at which Guyana has changed in the past 2 years is incredibly rapid. Such that if you're a property owner in this country, your long-term projected income is far, far different. I am sure that with doing absolutely no work, I'll be a US millionaire when I retire, because of the nature of the country and the direction we're headed. I have to do absolutely no work. But do people understand that? And it's so soon. Last year we only thought we had 5 billion barrels. The year before, the pace is very quick, and this is the fastest pickable production. So I think we're still catching our breaths. That's one thing. The second thing, though, is that it is difficult to lump all of the different experiences that people have had with oil into one, because Guyana is going to be, I think, very unique. One of the things that I think is important to note about Norway is, one, its population is relatively homogeneous. And two, there are very few people who move to Norway. Right? If I told you I was going to be dark every day all day long and it was cold all the time and you have to learn whatever they speak there. It's a challenge. But hey, education is free, so if I wanted to go, I could go. But what I'm trying to get at is that Guyana's circumstances will be very unique, A, and be very challenging. One, because we have very porous borders, and so we're going to have to address those types of issues seriously. So a study of what to do must be a very comprehensive study. And I've looked at some of these models, and Norway is a good one, but like I said, some of their challenges are different than our challenges, because migration will be a huge, huge issue in Guyana. If I told you that right now there's 6,000 legally registered Venezuelans in Guyana, but the Venezuelans say they've sent 37,000. So where are these 31,000 people? They're here. We have to deal and address these issues, or else they will consume us.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you.
Peter will always remain confused.
No, we'll provide some clarity for the reception. Speak with them, But my question to piggyback off of Elson is, given that our population is so small, and given that 200,000 Venezuelans or Brazilians or Haitians or any other group coming into the country could totally alter our demographics. My question is, what kinds of solutions or what kinds of policies do you think we should be pursuing? I don't know who to direct it to, so
I'm going to ask Lawrence to address that. And believe it or not, I'm also going to ask Grace, and I'll explain why I asked Grace, but Lawrence, go ahead.
I think a lot of what we're trying to discuss here are specific content decisions, technical decisions that need to be made, legislated, regulated, implemented. That's fine. What I think is underneath that, and which I suspect is behind a lot of the questions, including your own, is how do we actually arrive at a national consensus on the things that are important that need to be done, which we are going to agree to be done regardless of who is in power, so that these things are urgent and prioritized, whether it's refugees coming from across the border, and we have them already from other countries as well. We should welcome them as we were welcomed elsewhere, but we're not having a conversation about that. We're not having the kinds of wholesome discussions across political and other divides that say, how are we going to manage all this oil? There have been processes, don't get me wrong, but I would hazard an opinion that it has not led to the kind of national consensuses that we need, and so we end up spending a lot of our time arm wrestling each other politically and expending vital mental capacities when we should be thinking about the future and solutions such as we're talking about now. I think this is one of the beauties of this session tonight, is that it's a space where we don't have to worry about parties and politics and that. We're talking about concrete ideas, but we need to also remember there needs to be a process that takes us to the content, and if we don't have those kinds of processes, we will forever be arguing intellectually about what is better or what is worse.
And Grace, art always tells us about resilience and struggle and things like that. And lots of these communities come because they need, I mean, as simple as that.
You know, Karen and Saren and I and Eddie, we organized this panel, and we were very intentional, and Karen was very intentional in the title of it. And I want to bring us back to language. So the title of this panel is Toward a Just and Caring Society. Not a just and prosperous society, but we intentionally call it a just and caring society. And I want to remind us to be conscious of our language, because when Clive talks about how we help those that are poor and those that are vulnerable and those that are struggling in this country, what we're talking about is how do we care for people? How do we show care for people that are most vulnerable? And it seems to me that something that we ought to talk about is how we continue to demonize the poor in the way we talk about them, in the way we are talking about the policies towards them. And so that needs to be part of our conversation too. You know, the questions about, well, my family would spend that money on a party and a barbecue in a second. We have to be really vigilant about what the subtext of what we're seeing there is. You know, in that we only should care for people that are struggling if we feel they're deserving of it. Or we only should care for people if they're suffering if we can control how they spend what we give to them. That's not our call. If we are blessed, a caring, compassionate country helps people that are struggling. So that may not be a policy answer, but I think that we have to return to our heart and our compassion in these conversations too. And I read the Buxton proposal, and I do think that is what he's getting at, is how do we take care of people that are struggling and that need our help.
Good evening, everybody. And respecting the guidelines set up by our moderator, I don't want to go, and I can't go into all the dynamics of the international oil industry in which we are part. And you know, of course, that's the issue of prices of oil. It depends on lots of stuff we don't control. The thing I want to ask is, and following on from what Grace mentioned about just and caring society, the question is, do we need oil to deal with income poverty in Guyana? Income poverty in Guyana is something we need to deal with, absent oil or with oil.
Who wants to take that one? Clive? Because I
just want to remind people of basic identity. People that are called income poor don't have income. Oil has the possibility of giving us income. By definition, it can resolve the problem if we see that it can be an effective means of it. That's all I'm trying to direct attention at. And so we try to devise policies to make that possible. And Peter's question, I thought was very important, but I tried to answer it, but I didn't get a chance to finish it. What he's trying to ask is, why don't we learn from all the different experiences which are there. When I prepared to write an article, I'd be there to experience I could find. And they help in creating a view of what is possible. But I would believe and expect that the government agencies responsible for oil would be doing that. Even though my personal experience does not shed any light in that. I write every week about oil, and this has been a big disappointment to me. Because I'm not the person that I want to impose myself on anybody and say, no, be what I just want, what you think about it. But I don't get a sense that there's a serious think tank on the matter, which I would have, if I were in charge, would have treated as the highest priority activity in the country. And when I said ignorant, I didn't mean to sound bombastic. I call it ignorant. I seriously call it ignorant people who don't know, but don't know that they don't know. It's a category of forces that I speaking of. And there are at least 6 groups of that type that operate in Guyana. I will go into them now.
Don't forget, there are people over here.
Sorry, promise.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi. There seems to be an assumption that all the wealth that we will receive from oil royalties or oil revenues will be used for the greater good. And I haven't read the Buxton report. My question is, has the panel seen is there been any transparency in terms of risk management, with how the oil revenues will be used? Has the panel seen any documentation with regard to risks of the green environment, for example, which is which a lot of the developed countries are already planning to be in place by 2050?
Lawrence, you want to
Well, just 2 points on that. There is a thing called the Natural Resource Fund, which is a mechanism for governing the oil revenues and actually other revenues from other natural resources, I presume including coal and timber and so on. And the mechanisms for that are actually quite clear and I think quite useful. There is an oversight committee that is broad-based. It includes, I think for the first time, representatives from the 10 regions of Guyana and civil society, from Transparency Institute, the University of Guyana, the Association of Accountants and so on. It's quite a broad-based grouping. So I think on paper, it's looking pretty positive. Of course, as with other policies, it suffers from a lack of consensus at the political level, but we leave that aside for the moment. I think going to your other point though about the greenness of the country, we definitely have a challenge there. Even before oil and gas, we have not been doing a great job of protecting the green that we do have. We have a low level of deforestation, that is true, but we have a relatively high level of loss of biodiversity, degradation of canopy thickness, as well as things like pollution, mercury usage in the gold mining industry and so on. Not to mention a lot of social dysfunction that tends to happen in the gold mining sector, from trafficking in persons to sexually transmitted disease to crime and violence and so on. So I think in terms of just and caring society by then, we need to look away from offshore, because that oil is going to be sucked out and taken further away, and see what's happening onshore and how do we actually convert some of the oil revenues and attention to preserving this greenness to mitigate the emissions that we are going to be responsible for from the export of that oil. We are now going to be accountable internationally for that emission, and we will have to, I think, offset it by increased greenness. Of course, we have a green state development strategy, but again, it's a one hand trying to clap roti. We still don't have the other hand clap.
Questions on this side?
I wanted when the panel first began, to ask the question whether we should think of meritocracy as against democracy. And there, because in looking around, and I see the rise of Cuba, the rise of Singapore, the rise of Libya, and China, after 7 years, 70 years of being in society like that, should we think more of being a meritocracy than being a democracy?
I believe that is what we should always aspire to, across sectors of government, private sector. Your ability to competently and capably deliver to the people based on your plans, your manifesto, or company goals, that is how you should be measured, that is how you should be assessed. And if you are unable to do so, then you should relinquish those responsibilities to someone who will be able to do so competently. When people ask me questions about gender representation, which is one of the questions, would you mind if I shift it a little bit? About female participation in leadership role, I often respond in that way. And perhaps it's something strange for them to hear, that I would prefer that decisions be taken based on a candidate's ability to deliver, as opposed to anything else. First and foremost, their ability to deliver. I do believe that women have qualities to bring to leadership that may be more nurturing, greater degree of compassion, more inclined to reach compromise. They each have their strengths, but overall, in terms of leadership, integrity, intelligence, innovation, organization skills, I think that transcends gender boundaries. And I believe the emphasis should therefore be merit. So that for me is my criteria.
Thank you, Patricia. I think we have time for 2 more questions. I see Foreign Secretary Carl Greenwich wanting to come in. Your microphone is right to your
Strong believer in democracy. I must take it. People get enamored of trying to treat people when they have the skills and be deserving positions given to them. But the fundamental tenet for organizing any society must be democracy. As a descendant of a slave, I would never transfer the power to any elite, even an elite made up of people like me. So I don't want no meritocracy running rough riots over basic democratic.
I don't necessarily believe that we must relinquish one to the other.
I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that I don't want to let them believe that this is insinuating that government by merit is preferable to government by equality. One person, one.
I think we have
Do we want to see
I was going to allow the Foreign Secretary to go over the question. Let's hear from Carl.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry that your choice is being questioned from somewhere over to the left. I just wanted to say first of all that what prompted me to ask for the floor was, I think, a failure to appreciate that if you're going to have a meritocracy, you can't also be speaking of democracy. Democracy has to do with the selection of decision makers, your role, whether you are poor or educated, right or otherwise. That's what democracy is about. Meritocracy in terms of your bureaucracy and promotion within is a different matter. You can't put the two in the same basket. But I wanted to say very quickly, if I may, the question that seems to excite Guyanese and the one that seems to excite you by coming back now to the question of cash transfers. I want to say, first of all, the question posed by Peter is a question that all of you should be asking yourselves. We are a society that has difficulty in dialoguing meaningfully without degenerating very quickly into abuse, or the divisions among us are very great. And you will assume, CY made an opening presentation about the revenues likely to flow from oil. If you look at the newspapers in the last 2 years, you will not find 2% of the contributions in newspapers supporting that position, except his own, which is in there. Okay? And many of them are being made by persons without an insight into either oil sector or into economics. I just want to make that observation. A lot of the division that exists is compounded by, if you like, biased interventions. They're not informed by anything in particular. And so whilst it is true that much of the dialogue that should take place in arriving at selecting whether it's models or whatever it has not taken place, we don't help ourselves, because I think often we tolerate things in the fore of dialogue that we shouldn't tolerate. In other words, each person should have a right to be able to express themselves, but they also should not be allowed to make assertions and allegations that are fictitious and otherwise. And I have this, I mentioned it up to day before yesterday, in dealing with the Venezuelan issue that faces us. Part of that problem is our problem. And the final problem I want to make is that I don't think that there is this sort of visceral reaction against the poor and bias against the poor. There is prejudice in most societies. There's prejudice in here. And perhaps you have groups that are more subject to prejudice than the poor. I don't know whether I'm making sense to you. So, depending upon who you are, sometimes your ethnicity or where you come from, you may find that the reaction of the community is likely to be more unhelpful than simply because you're poor. And lots of the communities themselves are committed almost ideologically, as a Muslim, for example, categories of the church also, to helping and assisting the poor. But the question that I think gave rise to the whether or not cash transfer should be made to the poor turns not so much upon the dislike of the people for the poor. There are two sides. One has to do with, if you like, an economic theory. The other has to do with the bias of the public that feels, look, if I'm not destitute, then anybody else should not be given income without having to do something for it. And this is, you'll find a lot of resistance amongst the public. Incidentally, let me just say in closing that as regards the cash transfer, contrary to the report of what I said in Boston, I am not against cash transfer. I think it is largely a political issue. Okay? There are economic issues to attend to, if indeed they're meant to be permanent over, let's say, 10, 20, or 30 years. But essentially switch, short in terms of political.
Thanks. I think we've got to go back to giving the panel a chance to deal with some of the other questions, but I think Tini wanted to ask a question sometime. Who else is there?
So, I'm being accused of being fair and biased because there were folks over there that I told, okay, could you hold on until the next session, the next round. And I just told the young lady here, can we hold on until the next session? So, you're the moderator, tell me.
Okay. Then we'll hold on until the next round. Because I want us to go on about the idea of the world of work. I heard somebody mention earlier on that well, I think Elsa, we can probably exist, but all of what we have, will it change how we think about work and what we need to do? You raised it, so you go with that.
Well,
take the mic.
I think one of the most intriguing questions going forward, as more and more oil is hopefully discovered, is that one of the things I keep saying is that we're moving more and more away from the Trinidad model. That is to say that our resources and our population will no longer be analogous to that of Trinidad and become increasingly analogous to some of the Middle Eastern countries, which do, as was rightly pointed out by someone in the audience, import a lot of labor. And so it may be that if Guyanese are able to acquire capital over the next 25 years, that we see them shift, or we see the economy shift to Guyanese being, I hate to use a communist sort of terminology, but Guyanese being more of the bourgeoisie class who has capital. And you see a lot of migrant workers come in, etc., etc. That only happens in extremes of wealth, but we are as yet uncertain as to whether that will be the case. Alternatively, if we have fewer resources, then I think we will develop very much in a similar way to Trinidad and Tobago. I think you'll see similar levels of education. One of the key things that I think will be different, and this will, I think, impact the way that we look at our future, is that the Sovereign National Resources Fund, which is being put in place, which has been put in place, will, if it continues to go as it is intended, result in a far larger sovereign wealth fund than Trinidad and Tobago has. Trinidad and Tobago's fund is about $5 billion US. We will eclipse that within the first 5 years. Venezuela's is only 800 million. So what will happen is that when we get to 2025, you can have a middle class very analogous to Trinidad's middle class, but with a very large endowment analogous to the endowment that the Norwegian people have. And so that can also be used to propel Guyanese forward into this kind of bourgeoisie state. But that is if everything is managed to the optimum, and that remains the question.
Patricia, do you think that we can work with the public and private sector and ensure that we get to that point where we can probably use one form of a jobs guarantee program versus, let's say, the unconditional cash transfer system?
I think development in the workforce, or the direction in which the workforce moves over the next, say, 20 years, is dependent on a relationship between the public and private sector. The government enables, or has the role to enable growth in the private sector. And the private sector is intended to be the driver of that growth through investment. If the enabling environment is created and we can embark on wider economic diversification where we get into sectors that we had only once considered, what is it you like to call it? Guyana is full of the word, I'm sorry. But where we can finally develop across economic sectors, apart from just exploring natural resources, where we can have value-added activities and so on, then we can see a higher level of workforce in terms of technical capacity, which of course again comes back to the public sector and the provision of training, the enhancement of the TVET institutions. But the direction in which growth in the workforce goes is largely dependent on that partnership between the private and the public sector. And one creating the enabling environment and the other one being able to create the jobs. I'm not sure that the jobs guarantee program by the government of Guyana can work. We already have a scenario where we believe that the public sector is bloated, is not as efficient as it should be, and so to add numbers there may not be the most productive thing to do.
Clyde, you believe that if you did this cash transfer, then it would reduce the supply of labor? People, I think you kind of answered that earlier on, but I wanted you to expand a little bit on that.
Yes, but I think the greatest danger we face is not so much from the cash transfers, but from doing things that everybody sitting here takes advantage. The sovereign wealth fund or the natural resources fund. You know why we are going to that fund? At the heart of it lies one fear, and that fear is that the politicians would get their hands on the petroleum revenue. But history has shown that when you let the private sector get their hands on it, you get the biggest thief in the economy. Look at what is happening in Indonesia. You can't find billions and billions of dollars from the sovereign wealth fund that the investors told them. Look what happened after 2007-8, when they had a great recession and the collapse of the financial system. I'm going to speak at a seminar tomorrow, organized by the IMF, the government, at which I'm supposed to talk about fluctuating revenues and the role of the sovereign wealth fund. But my view is that the fund substitutes for investment in the now, for finding cash for the cash. That's what's begun. But nobody questions it. Everybody takes it for granted as more than you can read the paper and know tomorrow that we will have a sovereign wealth fund in which billions of dollars, maybe 10, 20, 30, 50 billion may be put into as insurance and part-time income. And the principle that is driving that is the fear that the politicians would get their hands on the money. And be willing to make all those sacrifices to satisfy that fear of the international community. And we don't want to spend the cash transfers.
Right.
The point I'm trying to make is that a lot of it is perception. A lot of it is perception. People can sell you a bucket of goods quite easily because it's something reasonable to most middle-class Guyanese that we invest in a fund that when a rainy day comes, we can draw upon. That sounds nice. The cost of that fund is being able to deliver goods and services to our people now. We need to have some insurance, I agree, but we need to calculate that carefully. We need to take into account the global experience. Look what's happening in Malaysia. The funds disappear, aircraft were bought, yachts were bought, you see the scandals all over the papers. The people are running these funds, run it to make money. They make money whether you lose money or not in the fund, because they're trading. So what the expectation is, because the portion from the IMF is a very supportive individual, is Alistair McIntyre's son, in the Caribbean portion. He's hoping to persuade the government that they should make more use of the institutional investors than the private sector investors. Because even though they have thieves in there, or not, it still has to meet but higher standards of propriety and so on than Fitch, let's say, or something, not private.
Clive, I was going to say that sometimes when I listen to you, I think it was Diogenes who went around with a lamp in the day looking for an honest man.
No, I'm not trying to be that at all. I'm trying to say that a lot of our weakness lies in the lack of vision that we have and the willingness to believe in our strength. We have great capabilities. We buy a lot of prejudices, a lot of prejudicial information.
Let me go to Elson again with regard, because you raised this idea about politicians in the private sector and so on. And I want to go to Elson again to ask about the Just and Caring Society, about youth and where we want to be in 2045. Elson, does the current political field crowd out the participation and input of youth? And why does it do that? And how can the younger generation participate in politics? Bearing in mind that I think Article 60, the lawyers in here will correct me if I'm wrong, requires you to elect members of the National Assembly, the legislature.
I think that one of the things that I've kind of encountered is that I don't know that some of the youth organizers are perhaps as well versed in the science of political science as might have been useful. Because if you look at Guyana's demographics, the majority of the population is young. And I mean, any political scientist can tell you that, you know, if you have a majority of one population, then you can easily appeal to them if you focus on them. But I think that young people have not really been able to very effectively organize, and we've not seen that consistently being done. I mean, we do have, you know, national councils, etc. But I mean, and actually, a council in Guyana should, for any one event, be able to pull 10,000 people with ease because there's such a large youth population. But I don't think that could happen. One of the largest youth movements that I have seen is I put together 5,000 people for the Free UG movement. It didn't take long, it didn't take much effort. That's because I knew that there was many people was out there who would easily support the issue, right? And looking at young people, I think we got 3,000 or 4,000 young people to sign on to that petition. So I think that thinking in a constructive way and thinking in a strategic way and really kind of sitting down and strategizing and structuring things has not been done very well. And I hope to see it done in the future, you know, but I can only voice a little bit of disappointment in the young people of Guyana as I see it, because I just haven't seen as much as you should see given the vast numbers that are available to support any cause.
Lawrence, are you more optimistic about youth and youth participation?
Well, I think so. Going back to the opening policy ideas, I think there are at least 3 ideas there that relates to young people and how we form them, how we encourage them, and how we give them a sense that it's larger than, you know, the economics or the money. It's about the quality of life that should make you want to stay here, and whether it's in the private or the public sector, and live a just and caring life. Much of what we see manifested as injustice and lack of care in the society is not going to be overcome overnight. I think we have to work towards it. I think one of the mistakes we could make is to assume that the do-gooders in the society, whether civil society or NGOs or others, are going to magically find the solution to all of our ills through young people. We have to be deliberate about how we form our young people and who is forming them and how they're being formed, and to hold those people who are responsible for these things accountable for specific metrics. And going back to, you know, how do we hold the state responsible for performance? Rwanda is a great example of a place where the president established benchmarks for all of his departments and ministries and says, look, in the next year I want you to reduce case backlogs by this amount. You know, I want you to reduce the murder rate by this amount. Whatever the social issues were, put it into a policy process where public officials are held accountable for those things. And I think that may be one of the ways in which we develop a more productive type of relationship between the state and the systems that we need around us.
Was that president to come to?
Well,
and there's a lack of youth involvement of peculiarity in Ghana. I think you're making assumptions.
well,
Youth involvement is a problem.
you're heckling Carl, or you? Just let me remind you what you're watching if you're with us on the UG Facebook page. You are watching a conversation toward a just and caring society, imagining Guyana in 2015. We've got Elson Lowe, Grace. 2045. 2045. We've been going back so often that it's affected me in terms of the time. We've got Elson Lowe, Grace Alley, Patricia Backus, Lawrence Latchman Singh, and Dr. Clive Thomas. And if you got very excited about the discussion earlier on cash transfers, we're going to open the floor again for the last half an hour to allow Guyanese to do what Guyanese do best. As Dr. Jagan once said, if talk could build a society, we would be the most developed society in the world. So let us continue with the conversation, but ask questions that will allow us to deal with some of the issues that we've been discussing this afternoon.
Good evening. My question relates to something that I feel underlying to almost everything that we've discussed so far. And that has to do with capacity building and because I just wonder, I'm almost surprised that it has not been discussed in a fulsome way, because I feel that that is the underlying challenge that we have in Ghana. And how do you feel we can deal with all these great things that we need to do, given the reality of our limited capacity in every area that's being discussed?
Anybody on the panel wants to deal with that? Whether we indeed have the issue of capacity building, lack of capacity, Lawrence or Patricia?
Well, just to say, I think, going back to the point about working collaboratively, we need a national partnership strategy or something like that that tries to find a way of bringing all the pieces together, because we are limited. We have few people and we need a lot of capacity building. Technical capacities, yes. So, for example, what can the diaspora do? What can QC as alumni do? How can we organize ourselves locally to receive your help from elsewhere? But we also need capacity at a softer level. So, if you think about the hardware of how you manage oil and gas or money, and so you can train people in universities for that. How do you build a capacity to be a just and caring country is a very different undertaking. And I think for that, we definitely need things like a national conversation, some consensus as to what is the problem and how are we going to fix it. We need to heal also. I think if you go to the underbelly, the nasty underbelly of this country, you'll find a lot of trauma that people have done to each other, whether it's what a man did to a woman, or what a thief man did to a victim, or what a person from one race did to another race, or what one party did to another. We are traumatized people. And this is acknowledged now at the psychological level when you talk to the psychiatrist people. We need to go back a long period in time to heal and stop, at least draw a line to say, look, we're going to go past all these points of division and pain and heal ourselves. I don't know if it's a reconciliation and healing kind of process like in South Africa, or whether it's something more national. Again, people are going to help us find a solution to this, but the capacities that we need are really essential, and I think that's what this conversation is actually about, so thank you for raising that.
Elson, you wanted to make a brief comment on it? And notice I said brief to you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I not to flog a dead horse, but one of the primary reasons that I'm so enthusiastic about pushing free UG is because I want to incentivize people to go back to school and people who were thinking about UG to go there. Reason being, we only have 2.3% of the workforce with a bachelor's degree. I mean, 30% is the average across most of the developed world. We got a lot. So it's about incentives. Thank you.
Some more questions.
I just wanted to raise a question about the absence of supporting our institutions that exist today. Because if we build a strong foundation now, we will have a better future. We have a drug treatment court, a sexual offenses court, a juvenile justice court, a family court, new civil procedure rules. We're talking about free education at the University of Guyana. What about the staff wages? We're talking about going in, but what about the capacity for the university staff? Where is that element? Why aren't we talking about, as Professor said, now, so that we can have a brighter 2045?
Pat or
thank you, Tini, for that comment, because in my response on the legal system and its importance, I did neglect to mention some of the tangible steps that have been taken by the judiciary. Perhaps I emphasize on what has not yet been done. But to answer your question, and an experience that I have in the private sector, we take young people, we have a policy of trying to employ younger people in manufacturing, in accounts, in human resources. I think the average age in of our board of directors is perhaps 40, and in our management team it's perhaps 37 or 36. But what we do find is when we take young people on, whether it's right out of secondary school or whether it's with a bachelor's degree, some of those softer skills and the capacity that we're talking about, like problem solving, critical thinking, the ability to deal with stress, the ability to take responsibility for one's own actions, those concepts are foreign to them. And so what we have to do, we have to go through 1 week of induction with each new staff, where we don't only teach them about the job that they're here to do or about our employment policies, but it's as if you have to start from scratch. You have to deal with everything from, please do not catcall a woman that you see in the compound, that is disrespectful. Everything from that to why it is important to ensure your time stamp is in, why you have a responsibility to report for work or call in if you're unwell. And I'm not sure when we're going to start imparting these skills in the school system. I'm not sure when last we have substantially revised the curriculum at all levels, primary, high school, universities. We have issues with suicide and mental health issues in this country, and we have not yet started in an impactful way to introduce classes and programs, because I think the school institutions that exist is perhaps the easiest way of targeting and dealing with some of these issues, and we've not been effectively using it.
Thank you so much. Some more questions? Karen, he's been up, his hand has been up a little.
Mine is a simple question. Mine's okay.
Use the microphone.
Really? Okay. Mine is a simple question and directed to Professor Thomas. Are you taking into consideration, since this country is one or two with a negative population growth, that in the event when we start to double our population, that the figure will remain the same at $5,000? Simple.
Well, first of all, the Buxton proposal is a limited proposal. It exists and exists only when the country is producing a full ramp up. By that I mean it's producing 1.5 to 2.5 million barrels of oil. So once it removes itself from that ramp up max, we have to avoid any open cash transfers to people of that magnitude. So I would say that it's something to be petered out, to be transitioned, but by then I'm expecting, because that should take a decade and a half, that people would have been able to maintain their livelihoods through the normal processes of work, investment and so forth, and continue. The funds will be given only to Guyanese, so that somebody who is migrating here for temporary work would not qualify for it. At least that's my view now, because of the proposal, for those of you who have read it, for a feasibility study and a pilot project. That's what it is, and that's what it's defined as in the paper that some of you have read. So it's not finally established as a concrete proposal at this point in time.
Would there be a difference between this as a follow-up, if I may? Follow-up, a difference between the Guyanese and those who are being employed, expats?
Well, I imagine if you're talking about the situation, let's say, 8 years from now, where a lot of the Trinidadians or Venezuelans might be coming in to do transitory work, or get a work permit to do something they were not qualified as residents, because it's treated as an oil dividend. It's a dividend going to Guyanese citizens as a result of the oil wealth that we discovered. So we will have to have citizenship. We have to be domiciled in here for a certain number of years to make sure they qualify for it.
They're married guys.
Karen will. Karen will hold on to the mic. We see you.
Go ahead, Phil.
I want to go back to the macro. We're talking about creating a just and social society 25 years. And if we look at the macro issues, we want to think in terms of how can giving money to the poor, giving money, all money to Guyanese, help in that way? I am totally in agreement with that. I want that to happen. And how can what we have right now, like we have a Ministry of Social Cohesion, what are the policies and the quantitative measures we need to put in place now so that we transform our society 25 years from now to create the act society which we asked about to? And the panel tell me some concrete ideas. What can be done?
Guy, you want to begin since you started this?
I just want to make the point that I tried to operationalize the Boxer proposal. If you leave your email address, you get a copy to you. What I'm proposing is a feasibility study and a project, a pilot project. So those concrete details will be elaborated on. But what I'm claiming also, that you can't wait until we get oil to start that. That should be started way back in 2018 when it was I first made the proposal. So we're running out of time. So as a matter of urgency, I would imagine, and I understand there may be a preparation of a green paper on the matter, that the government will try between now and the election, and whoever comes into power after the elections, to get a feasibility study, to get a pilot project going, so that before the end of 2020, we begin to formulate the concrete elements of the project. It's something you can't just do based on a simple paper that I've written, or one person has written. You have to bring into play the government institutions that matter. I suggested the technical secretariat for it be the University of Guyana and the Bureau of Statistics. I suggest also that the international agencies that have written books on this matter and have had experiences in it and have written positively on it be partners in the process. I met with the IMF people today and they are happy about it because it's part of the Sustainable Development Goals to have universal basic income schemes. So we try to do something that is concrete and measurable and moral. But you can't do that from one simple exercise. So I'm trying to get the plans in place. The problem that we face is that the only discussion at the governmental level yet, I was giving you a joke. The topic was titled cash grant. So it offended me because if it were a cash going to the private sector, as I pointed out in the meeting, you would have put cap incentives. Once you start with a cash grant, I knew the attitude that we had to fight against. But they were amazed about it and the range of the issues that were being addressed in the paper. They thought it was some fly-by-night scheme to produce give away money to people like that and so on.
You know Clive is also a politician when he mentions the same thing 3 times. Alright. Who else is ready to ask questions? Karen, we've got this guy back here.
Eric has had his hand up instead of standing over here.
Okay. You can see better.
We spent a lot of time speaking about instruments and not about institutions. If we were to take a critical path analysis of what a just and caring society should be, we'd be talking about institutions. We cannot become a just and caring society with the current political constitution. It's a winner-take-all constitution. It means there are winners and losers. And we have a motto of one people, one nation, one destiny, which is we're all winners. So my question is to the panel, can we have a just and caring society with this constitution? And just to add another point, we're talking about cash transfers, which is an instrument, and we may not have enough cash to get enough capital. You're at risk if you did a critical path.
I'm going to we're going to hold your question for them to answer, Eric, while we hear from this gentleman who's been persistent in keeping his hand up.
Thank you. I have lived in the last half a century on 3 other continents. And there I found that poverty still exists we in Guyana don't know what poverty is. You should go to Asia and you'll find out. Jesus said, the poor you have with you always. My parents used to tell me about persons who came back from Guyana and give donkeys $10 bills to eat, how they spend the gold money. And in this era, I have a nephew who came back with $2 million, and after 3 weeks he had to borrow packets to go back. So the poor is not just absent of money, it's not knowing how to utilize the money that they have. Now my question. My mother left school when she was 12 and worked in the rice field. I'm coming to the question.
So we're very close to this.
All right.
We have a number of comments.
Yes. When we look back and see what we have done for the 50 years of independence, and now we're looking forward to the next 25, what lessons have we learned? What values have our generation, I'm saying the poor, what values have we not been passing on to the next generation? Honesty and integrity and looking after each other.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Lawrence dealt with some of those matters very early in his presentation and Patricia. But I wanted us to go back to Eric's, to answer Eric's question. Anybody would want to tackle that at this level? Lawrence?
Well, that's the million dollar question, or the million barrel question. How do we fix the systems in a way that actually makes the entire political system function better? You know, it's a good thing we got a bar over there, because we need it for a conversation like this. Personally, I think we do need to look at constitutional reform. We definitely need to look at electoral reform. There's a bunch of things that need to get done. Including the kind of fostering of a healing at a political level, a reconciliation and trust. We cannot work together in this country unless we somehow get over the things that have blocked us. And currently those things are blocking the constitutional reform conversation as well. I don't know what it would take to push that out, but that's why I proposed earlier, let's start from the bottom up, re-educate and re-socialize our nation so that we eventually, miraculously perhaps, reach a point of nirvana where people say, oh yeah, this is something we need to do. The other way to do it, of course, is if the two big leaders could come to a consensus that we need to open this conversation up and do something in that direction, I think that would work. I want to just put out a point, and this is a positive, I think, to just celebrate one positive in terms of a lesson that I think we've learned, is that bi-communalism or ethnic harmony is somehow better than division. And one of the things that's happened over the last 40 years is that we have actually blended our ethnicity in this country from 11% in 1980 to almost 20% in 2012. All of you who've made a contribution to this blending, you deserve a special thank you. Please keep it up. But I think that is changing fundamentally this society in terms of the demographics and the political imperatives and incentives in a way that we can't predict right now. But I hope, ultimately, Eric, that in answer to your question, maybe those kinds of conversations can become easier to have as we grow a larger middle space that is able to sort of separate itself a little bit from the usual sort of magnets.
I want to throw this to Grace, because I think sometimes, and I noticed Malcolm Defreitas from the Theatre Guild was putting his hand up, sometimes we don't realize that we can also use the arts to tell the story and correct and guide.
Well, as I'm hearing the question about how, I think what I have to offer is not how, because I'll leave the how to the experts on the panel, but I'm more interested in who is at the table having these conversations, all these conversations that need to happen. And what I know is we certainly need more women at the table in these conversations. We certainly need more young people at the table in these conversations. I actually have a different experience with young people. I work a lot with young people both here in Guyana and in New York, and they are brilliant and fired up and ready to go, but what they will tell you is that nobody asks them what they think. We're too busy telling them what to think.
Nobody asks like I know. Said it 3 times.
You know, I think we have to do a better job at engaging our youth and creating the spaces for them to feel uncensored about how they can contribute. And I don't think we do that enough. I think we certainly need more of our indigenous communities at these tables when we have these conversations. So, you know, to answer your question about how, I think about all the people that are not at the table in these conversations that we need to be more inclusive of and have them part of these conversations.
But specifically to the institutions part, Patricia.
When I was asked about my views on what can take us to a just and caring society, my emphasis was on institutional functionality. Because I believe that is the only real way to guarantee some level playing field for the citizens. That everyone must be able to access quality services at the level of healthcare, social protection, education, and it is only if those institutions function as they ought to and serve the people, then we all have the opportunity to progress. So Eric, I agree with you completely. And that is why, although I don't disagree with the Boxon proposal, especially since it is capped at 10% of the revenue, or the government's take of the revenue. But equally, I think it is important for us to invest in institutional strengthening, because that is the sure and certain way of achieving progress that can be felt and measured by all the citizens. I believe also that infrastructure has to come in with a considerable take. I mean, those of you who do not live here and would have been here over the last few days and encountered the traffic scenario in and around Georgetown, we have not had an honest discussion with a view to actually finding solutions on pervasive. The amount of man-hour is lost daily because of the situation on the roads, the amount of lives lost because we cannot effectively do something about the roads, and again, constitutional reform, because we might have a project started under one administration or conceptualized under one administration, and if there's a change in administration, we go back to the drawing board, and that is how we've been functioning. Largely, not all the time, but so institutional strengthening, infrastructure, education, what else? Health services. Well, in institution, health, education, security, the strength of your revenue authority and its ability to enforce revenue laws, enforce tax laws, and that is unusual coming from somebody in the private sector. And this is live streaming, so, but it's a combination of measures, in my estimation, that would take us to a just and caring society. And the cash transfer is just one aspect of it.
Thank you. Karen, we can accommodate like 2 or 3 more questions, because we were supposed to end at this hour, but we started 15 minutes behind schedule.
So my colleague next to me has a question.
So my question is for Dr. Thomas regarding the Buxton proposal and just generally about cash transfers conceptually. My first question in regards to the guidance context is you, in terms of implementation, you talk about having cash transfers done through a bank institution or through some sort of internet technology. And I'm curious about what is the percentage of the unbanked in the country, the unbanked population, and the penetration of ICT. and what research would be required to get to the point where you can actually do cash back transfer in the way that you have described?
Well, I'll answer that very simply. It is precisely the project that we have to start with. You have to start to find out how you're going to make the transports feasible. You can't do it by sending it in a cardboard box. You can't send it by scribble. You can't send it by paper bag. The only way it can be transmitted is that you have to have a program to digitize the entire economy. So it's linked to that endeavor. That's an integral part of it. The second thing is that you also have to make sure that as the income under the present law, everybody pays taxes. And the taxes and the income will have to be paid. Which means that you have to ensure that everybody comes under the tax system that receives the tax, which means every household in the country. That means, as a result of that the contract that is normally between the state and the citizen is upheld. The state collects its taxes and it has the responsibility of citizens. So some citizens can't disappear into the underworld and not pay any tax at all. So you have a system in which that becomes feasible. And I'm saying also, because it goes to every household, it is race and locally neutral, because it does not require giving to favorite constituents or to anybody or any race that you're looking for. It was also possible for you to note, and I think this is very important, that 100 households in Guyana make up an enumeration district. There are 210,000 households, which means there are about 2,100 odd enumeration districts in the country. Can you imagine what it means if you can create that amount of areas within the country that have within themselves the capacity to spend $100 million at least per annum? It transforms the investment climate in the country, spending at the local level. I can think of no project in Guyana that can be spread throughout Guyana in that way. 2,100 households, $100 million per year, distributed everywhere. Every 100 households has that capacity. So it makes for a very different environment for generating income and jobs and so on. That's the ambition with it. That's why I say that to be organized. It can't be an effort of lifetime. It has to be a state effort. It has to be an effort of the government. Some government, I don't want to come to the power after elections next year, commits to doing. But I'm happy to learn that at least some effort will be made to explore the idea more systematically and immediately.
Karen, we can take 2 more questions.
Yes.
No, hold the microphone. I know, Malcolm. Hold the microphone, Karen.
Malcolm, your question. Eric spoke on the Constitution, and that's very basic, and we have to sit this entire argument of the value function to make us a better society in 2045. We have a root in the Constitution which allows it. The problem in our Constitution right now, the political process is an extremely competitive process, and we have 2 large blocks largely sharing the political space. That creates the major division that we have going right now. The other thing, the issue is that the mill is not going to get very big. So, Lawrence, you got to be aware of that too. The issue we have Article 13, which allows us to get the opportunity to a national government. Or we could go into the political process determining that the next government should be a national government. We have to have careful sharing of ideas and concepts. We have to get the sharing of a vision. And in the sharing of the vision, we can disagree of how we're going to get there.
Your
point is that much of the problem lies in the political process, and we have to solve that problem. And I'm talking about how we're going about getting to solve that problem.
The question is that you want us...
We want us to examine the root of Article 13, or in the process...
Article 13.
Article 13, you should read the Constitution.
I'm going to ask the lawyers something.
Any of the lawyers?
They don't get free legal advice, just. John, again, hold the mic. Hold the mic.
My question is very simple. You're pushing me to think another quarter century from today.
Say again?
You're pushing me to think of another quarter century from today.
Yes.
I've already finished 3/4 centuries. Me, Mom, and Annette, and there. And you try to strip another quarter century. What is going to happen for me next year? I'm a pensioner. So what is it for me and the president? He's almost as president, he gave us pension. No problem with that. It's adequate. Those of us who have been struggling with pensions know what is going to happen to us.
I think that brings us to an important part of this discussion, where we ought to look at those who are disadvantaged, those who are marginalized, those who are in some cases different from the way we see ourselves. So perhaps we ought to look at that to see whether indeed we ought to deal with those classes and groups. Grace? How do we deal with those classes and groups that may be disadvantaged? Like, pick out who are worried that the pension or
it has no value.
I'm going to ask a friend to answer that question. I'm going to pass it to a friend.
Okay. Thank you. I think the word we're looking for are social safety net. And I think that we do need to have a comprehensive discussion around what the social safety net going forward will be and what implications that will have for the function of the economy. I think that subtends many elements of the discussion, from cash transfers to how we deal with marginalized groups. And you know, there are very simple things that can be done, such as raising or building up the benefits that one receives if, for example, you're laid off. It takes a couple of months for you to find a job. The benefits are received there. Disability benefits. I think all of those things, I mean, there's a huge homelessness problem in Guyana that needs to be addressed. I think those are the types of things that we as a country have to continue to discuss. I would hope that the nonprofits would turn their focus towards interrogating these issues and towards putting forward solutions that the government can look at and try to adapt or adopt. Because I think that they have spent a lot of time serving those communities, and as a result probably have a lot of insight as to the way forward. But a discussion around the social safety net is critical.
Anybody else on the panel wants to deal? You share the same. Wonderful. One other question and then we close.
My social safety net says that I can't afford to buy a beer up here. I'm on a frenzy to buy 5 staff for 1,000. That's what I can afford. When can I come here my own militia to get the value of the beer up here?
I'm going to ask Patricia to comment on it, but I mean, while it appears as if you're trivializing it a little bit with beer, I remember getting a call from my primary school teacher. I went to school right around the corner here at Kingston Government School. And at 80, she was very concerned that she'd sold her house, moved into a senior citizen's residence, and called me and said, Enrico, at the rate that I have to pay for this the service. I'm going to run out of money before I'm 85. She died at 83. I think she just took it on and was very concerned about it. And I think we tend to treat it sometimes as if it's not important, but I think it's a very important point to make, John.
First of all, up until very recent, pensioners were lining up at the post office in the hot sun all day to receive that pittance. And I think the same discussion we're having about how we view the poor and how abstract we are about it. I think it's pervasive across suffering felt by all categories of Guyanese. I do believe, and I know senior citizen benefits have increased, not significantly. We've had some increase in benefits over the last few years. But I believe in a country like ours where currently the resources and the priorities are such that you cannot spend on everything you want to spend on, we have to honestly speak about what our social priorities are. For me, no one should go hungry. That is priority number one. There should be no hunger in this country. So, school feeding programs, places in the communities that offer hot meals to citizens without a question being asked. For me, that is priority number one. And that, if we can embark on something meaningful like that, that also creates jobs in those very communities. A safe space, jobs, a hot meal. But I think it comes down to prioritizing. And for you, it may be 5 beers, but for others, it may be, I mean, I just used 5 cases. Well, you're one of the fortunate ones. But I believe it has to start somewhere, and we have to start prioritizing, and we have to start planning, and this brings us back to, again, how do we intend to use the revenues that we're currently receiving and that we are due to receive in the coming years?
One final question.
Thank you.
So it's leadership. Do we need a strong visionary leader to strong arm or make sure that all of these ideas that we discussed are implemented? Do we need a strong visionary person to shepherd us towards this justice?
The governance person on this panel is Lawrence. Carl is not on the panel. We've allowed him to make an intervention or two. But I think we've got to wrap up right now. But before I let the panel go, I'm going to ask each member of the panel, and I'm going to time you to maybe the same question I asked at the other panel. In 2045, if you were here, what would bring you joy? 5 seconds.
If there was no poverty, if there was no income poverty.
Lawrence, what would bring you joy in 2045?
The country would self-regulate itself in terms of behaviors and attitudes, and so we wouldn't need as much external interventions, whether by think tanks like this or the institutions of state.
If we were kinder to each other.
Grace?
That we would put a halt to this mass exodus of leaving and more of us return and stay.
If we could have more of tolerance for